I mean, it's not funny at all, Jordan. Not funny.
Yeah, it doesn't look anything like him.
We're going to be out of focus and looking horrible today. Jordan's just upset now. Oh, it was a sad countdown.
What is going on, guys? It is the Awesemo MLB Live Before Lock / strategy show. We're going to be talking about the main slate, which is actually early slate. And then at the end, we'll talk about tonight's 3-game MLB slate, kind of a roundup of that. So if you guys have any questions about tonight's slate, ask us about that at the end here. We're sponsored by Prize Picks. If you are signing up at Prize Picks for the first time, use the promo code Awesemo. Get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit and 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Eric, how do you like today's afternoon slate? Some afternoon baseball.
Yeah, it's all right. I'm looking at some of the stuff. I mean, obviously my twins are on it, so I'm going to be listening to it in the car. I'm going to build a bunch of lineups, and then I get to go play golf this afternoon. So it's going to be a beautiful thing. I'm just deciding whether or not I want to even be in the NBA streets. We'll decide, but definitely playing this early slate. Definitely going to be enjoying it with the twins on it, but going to probably be a team that I might have to fade more than likely.
Which I imagine doesn't make you all that happy because you are a Minnesota Twins homer, and homer. May try to say that I said that properly, but also in addition to that, Brian Buxton is back today. Who
beautiful thing.
Before the season, I did have an MVP bet on, and he got off to a very good start here, then promptly got hurt as per usual. But false alarm. At least this one is he's still good for now. But is he going to be hurt today, tomorrow, the week after? Potentially. But at least for today in the lineup, we can feel pretty good about that. Anything else, just kind of, I like to ask, just overarching thoughts on this slate. Anything you're looking at bigger picture, weather-wise, or anything like that we should be aware of?
No, I think for the most part, we're in the clear. Looks like we're all right. I mean, the Cleveland weather has been weird for the most part, but it looks like it's just kind of rain around it. Baltimore, Oakland has been a weird spot too, where Oakland, we don't see much in terms of weather there, but that's been something that's popped up routinely the last couple days. It's a Baltimore team that I want to attack from a sports betting angle. Makes it a little bit more difficult because you never really see a bunch of strikeout arms on the mound there in this Oakland-Baltimore series. There's just no good baseball players, period. So it always ends up being kind of bleh. And you can normally isolate some DFS bats, maybe as one-offs, just because of how bad the pitchers are. But Blackburn's probably the best of the grouping that Oakland has left. So I'm finding it to be pretty, as far as weather goes, as far as bats go, in terms of Baltimore, Oakland, probably just kind of looking at the rest of the board.
And we'll be talking about that game later, but do you know how bad your offenses have to be when there is a pitching matchup of Paul Blackburn versus Tyler Wells, and it has the lowest total on the entire slate? The run total is 7 for the Oakland-Baltimore game. The pitchers are Paul Blackburn and Tyler Wells. I hate these teams. Can we just do away with something? And I know the NBA, I don't know if you saw this, the NBA, it looks like they're going to be expanding to 2 more teams, bring a team to Seattle, a team to Las Vegas. Can we contract some of these awful MLB teams and just make them into NBA teams or something? Because it's ridiculous. We have some of these teams to talk about. But
did you see the attendance in Oakland? Did you see the attendance yesterday?
It's like 8.
There were 3,000. There were like 3,000 people there on the second half of the game. On that was 2 days ago. Yeah, the ridiculousness. They have to move that team if it's going to be that bad, because even in a down year for the Twins, they're going to basically be selling out Target Field. It's just it doesn't make sense to me that it could be it's this bad.
And also on this, I'd have to. Mike Campbell just posted in YouTube chat. I have to look this up. Every single Baltimore Orioles game has gone under the total so far.
Yeah. So
is that true?
Yeah, so I was talking about I do my MLB best bets. So on Mondays, Thursdays, Fridays, I put together my MLB best bets. And I've just been smashing the Oakland money line here up against Baltimore. And they also have only had 2 home runs on the season. Cedric Mullins has both of them. So that's pretty interesting.
I knew about that. So the other thing too is, it's a road game, so it's not going to be all that pertinent for this slate, but Baltimore changed the dimensions of their park because it used to just be such a hitter-friendly place. And they've changed it so that it has bigger dimensions. And now it looks like they might have turned it into a fairly extreme pitcher's park, which is good. If you have a shitty baseball team, you also want to make sure that they're only playing in 4-2 games, a really good way to make it a good product, which it seems like that's what's going on in Baltimore. Once again, it's a road game, so it's not going to matter for this slate. But
also, who are the guys who are going to hit home runs in those ballparks? Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, Vlad Guerrero. There's still going to be home runs anyway. You know what I mean? It's like, you're only hurting your baseball team where you had slapstick power. You had Santander, you had Trey Mancini that are good hitters for the ballpark, but you've only hurt your chances to win because what? Mookie Betts came there as a Red Sox and went just completely bonkers a couple times. And you're like, oh, we got to tiger proof it like we did Augusta National. It's just the dumbest thing ever.
Yeah, and I'm looking up. So how many have the Orioles? Is that they haven't had one over even by accident? They haven't like accidentally scored 5 runs in a game or something.
Which also, can we give a shout out to Baltimore's bullpen? That's kind of surprising. But also, it's Camden to Oakland to really start off your season. That'll kind of help anybody keep the ball in the park.
Yeah, it's probably past the point now, but in hindsight, there was clearly a lot of value to be had by just looking at the ballpark dimensions and realize like, oh, this is going to be a lot more pitcher friendly, and then just betting a bunch of unders there. But yeah, 11 games for the Orioles, 11 unders, just fantastic stuff.
Somebody in the chat just said, "I love being an Orioles fan." Their name, Fueled by Vomit. That's all you need to know.
Yeah. Fueled by Vomit. I love being an Orioles fan. This is it. He probably goes to the game with bags on his head, like the old Cleveland Browns fans. But yeah, that's just absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, first game to talk about on the slate, we have the New York Yankees on the road against the Detroit Tigers. And let's start by talking about the Yankees side of the game and the pitching in particular, because we do have Jordan Montgomery on the mound, and he was crazy, crazy popular in his last start. And a little bit less so for this one. We have him projected for, still a healthy 27% ownership on DraftKings, but he's only 6,900. That's a price tag that I find pretty difficult to stay away from. And then on FanDuel, it's 7,800, only projected for 14% ownership. This seems like a pretty reasonable spot to get to Jordan Montgomery. Actually, his last start came against the Baltimore Orioles, and he was something like 55% owned and just didn't go deep enough into the game to really pay off his price point. Different situation here where he's cheaper. To me, though, I think you and I did that show together the last time we saw Montgomery pitch. Mm-hmm. How do you view him today relative to what we talked about in the last time he went out there?
Yeah, I mean, he's good. He's better. I mean, 58 to 71 pitches. We're seeing some drastic improvement there. The thing I get worried about is I'm just thinking long-term for this baseball team for Detroit. I'm okay targeting lefties with them. Like it's going to be long-term something that I think that's going to be where they're more effective. But 1.2 whip here for Jordan Montgomery in the early going of the season, 3.24 ERA. None of that really matters. What matters is we know the track history. He's a decent enough pitcher, and 6,900 is kind of a misprice. He's going to be crazy popular, though. We only have him at 27.3% ownership, and something makes me think, just because of the amount of bats, yeah, we still have these value bats in Minnesota, KC. We still have some value bats scattered around the entire league here today, but it feels like 6,900 is a number you kind of land on quite a bit, as I've just been hand building some lineups here, waiting for Cruncher to get going. So I'm looking at Jordan Montgomery as a guy that I almost have to fade just because I expect his ownership to be even higher than that. I don't know if that pitch count is going to be over 80 right out of the gate here. 58 to 71 is a sizable improvement, but it's still not like I'm getting 85, 90. I think there's certainty other places on this slate. So at his current ownership, I think I got to be looking elsewhere.
By the way, I believe Fantasy Cruncher is now working again.
Beautiful.
So if you guys want to go check that, I have not built my MLB lineups yet. So that is now something that we could start doing on this show. So I'm going to reserve more entries now because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do that or not. But let's see. All right. All set for right now. But yeah, so we'll be building some lineups as we go. As for Tiger stacks, this is a small slate. And also I have to point out different slate, DK versus FanDuel. FanDuel 6-game slate. DraftKings is a 7-game slate. So the FanDuel slate does not include the Arizona-Washington game, which is a 4 p.m. game, which DraftKings does. So that is going to make some of the numbers and data a little bit different when we look at the two different sites in terms of stacks. But with Jordan Montgomery expected to be relatively popular, we do have a Tigers offense that is capable of hitting left-handed pitching a little bit. Do you like them just for contrarian purposes? Because they're only projected for 2% ownership as a stack over on DraftKings, whereas on FanDuel, Montgomery is also expected to be a little bit popular. They're also only projected for 2% ownership. Is that appealing to you at all on a smallish MLB slate?
Sure is. And also, there's really only one decent weather environment, 70 degrees in Kansas City, get 64 in Washington here. Everything else is basically 60 degrees or cooler. But as I said, I think Detroit, just looking at this lineup long-term, it's going to be Robbie Grossman leading off, a former Twin shout out. He's a switch hitter, but he's basically only effective from the right side. Jonathan Scope, Miguel Cabrera, Austin Meadows at 5 is interesting. Eric Haas and Torkelson, I have a lot of interest in at the bottom half of the lineup. I think that there's just a lot of power that exists here. It's going to be the most popular pitcher, perhaps on the entire slate outside of Cease and maybe Gausman. But I'm looking around and it just feels as though Jordan Montgomery is going to be even more popular than what we currently have him projected for. That makes him kind of an easy guy to target, especially when you're making more than a couple lineups. Even if I'm hand building just 4 or 5, I'm pretty sure Detroit is going to be one of those main lineups.
And then pitching for the Detroit Tigers, we have Michael Pineda on the mound, and this is going to be the season debut of Pineda. He has been working in the minor leagues right now, gearing up for the season. He's had a very odd career. Number one, he's cheated in about every way imaginable. We've seen, we've seen PED suspension. We've seen the suspension for sticky fingers on the substance. And then the other thing too, is he's had a lot of injuries. And now we're at a point in his career where, he wasn't totally miserable last year. He had a 3.62 ERA, but if you look at the underlying numbers, there was a lot of luck involved. He had a really high strand rate. His BABIP was a little bit lucky. So he had a 4.92 expected ERA. But here's the thing really that gets me to look at Michael Pineda is when you compare the injuries with the age. So he's had Tommy John surgery. He's had shoulder surgery. He's 33, and here are his velocity numbers over the last few years. Average fastball velocity, 94.7. 93.9, 92.6, 92.1, and last year, 90.9. There's a very clear downward trend here. And just looking at those peripheral numbers from last year, I think we're just going to look at Michael Pineda totally fall off a cliff this year. So the New York Yankees as an offense, it's one that I definitely want to get to. There's a whole lot of power in that offense. I have no interest at all in Pineda as a pitcher. I think that he's going to really struggle this season and probably have a little bit of a pitch count today. But how do you view the Yankees against him?
I'm with you. I mean, this is a team that we just have to be getting to guys like Aaron Hicks leading off 3,400, Aaron Judge, Rizzo, Stanton, everybody up and down this lineup. Crazy amounts of power. You have Gallo in the 6 hole. Marwin Gonzalez, even in the 8 hole, the multi-utility guy, just kind of interesting to see him there. Jose Trevino. 1 through 9, there's power, there's opportunity. I guess the one guy I probably have the least amount of interest in the lineup is Kiner Falefa. Just Texas, I don't really see anything where in that time that's really going to translate here to this team where there's going to be any kind of utility power there. He's cheap. That's the nicest thing I can say about him. But I think you're really looking at the main core of guys. Aaron Hicks gives you a little bit of salary relief putting the stack together. And I'm with you. Michael Pineda just is bad. 22.5% K percentage last year. Seems all right. Limited walks. 3.35 expected ERA. You kind of touch base on everything there, but he had visa issues. I don't think he's even going to be able to go that long in this start. He ended up getting to AAA pretty late. And this just feels like a spot you're just immediately thrust into, hey, facing the Yankees offense, which long-term is going to hit balls hard, long, and far. Give me a lot of Yankees today.
All right. Good rant. That was just enough time for me to start setting some of my lineups here. So
I was watching. Again, this is the report. You do 48,000 shows together, and here you go. I recognize when you're actually doing something.
Yeah, well, here we go. We're going to have these in soon, and then I'm going to have a run here, and I'll kind of have an idea of these are the teams that I'm targeting, which I think should help from a talking standpoint also, where I really know the spots that I'm looking to target heaviest. And then, even general without my lineups being built, I kind of have an idea because a lot of my stack percentages are built off the boom bust tool. But then there's some spots where I'll kind of deviate a little bit. Like the Yankees look like a negatively leveraged team in the top stacks tool. But I'm so low on Michael Pineda as a pitcher that I'm still going to be getting to a healthy amount of Yankees. So for the most part, though, a lot of my exposure is going to be dictated by the top stacks and the top pitchers tool. But moving on to the next game, we have the San Francisco Giants against the New York Mets. 2 pretty solid pitchers on the mound in Carlos Carrasco and Anthony DeSclafani. But I want to start by talking about Carrasco here because he is another guy who's had a very kind of odd pitching past in terms of he's had a bunch of injuries himself. He's had shoulder injuries. He's had elbow injuries. He also had cancer at one point, which he lost a year of his career to. And I think you have to kind of take all of that stuff and weigh it and then think that some of his recent performances in the last few years might not be indicative of who he actually is as a pitcher, last year in particular. So he goes out, he makes 12 starts last year, pitches 53 innings, and just didn't look good at all. 34 years old. I think it was reasonable to look at and be like, hey, maybe he's just a guy who's on the decline. But this year, in 2 starts, and once again, only 2 starts, he's looked back like the pitcher he was a couple of years ago. So we've got a 0.84 ERA, 2.86 expected ERA. And if you look at the strikeout numbers, 33.3% K rate, he's swinging and missing a lot. He's getting a lot of swing and misses. I think Carrasco is back to being a good pitcher. Not that he's going to uphold the sub-1 ERA or anything like that, but I think maybe like a solid, middle of the rotation guy is something we could expect from Carrasco this year. Does that seem reasonable, and how are you going to handle him?
I'm pretty uncomfortable with Carlos Carrasco because now we're also seeing some ownership. If he was completely unowned, I would feel a lot more comfortable. But I mean, we're talking about 154 pitch sample size, and that's just hard for me to just say, oh, he's automatically back. We've definitely seen some improvement. We've definitely seen some things that garner attention, but his 2 starts were against Washington and Arizona. So I'm also going to be weighing the fact that the opposition wasn't exactly above average starting right out of the gate. What's nice is seeing the strikeouts return. 21.1% in 2021. That was his lowest mark by far, nearly 4% lower than 2016, his next lowest mark at 25%. So if the K stuff is back, I'm all in and back to playing Carlos Carrasco long-term. But against this San Francisco offense that's the most positively leveraged in the top stacks tool, that has a bunch of lefties with a lot of power, you get Jock Peterson now batting cleanup in the heart of this order. That's just another guy that causes a lot of concern for me for Carrasco in this spot. I'm probably going to be shorter on Carrasco than most here today. If he burns me today, I've got to really take a long-term look at him. I liked him as a Cleveland pitcher. I liked him. He had Cy Young stuff once upon a time. And, if we can even see any glimmer of that here, he's 35 years old. We're seeing pitchers and athletes take their careers into longer stages than ever before because of how advanced we are in terms of nutrition and everything else. But I'm just not willing to just buy back in on 2 starts against 2 subpar offenses.
Yeah. And so, by the way, because I'm also running my lineups right now, and I'm about even with the field on Carrasco. It looks I'm at 19% at the moment. So he's in my player pool, but I'm around. It's not like he's somebody who, because you mentioned the ownership, he's projected for 24% ownership on DraftKings. FanDuel, he's projected for 12% ownership. It's not like he's a guy that's in 30% of my lineups or anything. I'm right around the field, and I kind of feel it's where I'm comfortable being, just because, like you said, it's hard to know exactly where he's at. He's looked good so far this year. I just don't want him to make or break my slate. I don't want it to be a thing where it's like, oh, look, Carlos Carrasco's an ace again. He scores 30 fantasy points. I don't have exposure to him. But on the other side, too, I'm going to have some exposure to giant stacks. And I'm, once again, just kind of going holding hands with the field when it comes to Carrasco, just where he's not somebody who makes or breaks my slate. But on the other side with the San Francisco Giants, projected for less than 2% ownership as a stack over on DK. FanDuel also going to be really low owned just because of some of the unknowns with Carrasco. This is a team that I think if you're playing 150 lineups, it makes sense to have somewhere in the neighborhood of, 6-7% exposure to. That would have you well over the field, but also not a massive investment against Carrasco. But we've seen the San Francisco Giants offense has continued to defy expectations last year and also to start this year. We saw Chris Bassett last night was 50% owned on DraftKings, and the San Francisco Giants really roughed him up. This is a good offense. I thought this team was going to be no good last year. I thought they were going to regress this year. It just hasn't been the case so far. The Giants have a good offense. I think they're worth stacking on a smaller slate.
Oh yeah, they're definitely worth stacking. And part of it is that I just think that there's an offensive outbreak coming even further more than what they've had here in the early going of the season. Mike Yastrzemski is hitting the ball really hard, 91.7% exit velocity, 42.9% hard hit percentage. That's only translated to a 219 average with no home runs. I love, and I do mean love, when this happens in the early season to certain hitters, because it suppresses ownership until they start to quote unquote get hot or whatever the hell that means. Jock Peterson has been hot, if you want to just say by all intents and purposes. 708 expected slugging percentage, 466 ex-WOBA, starting off with 25 batted ball events here in 2022. The guy's phenomenal. Brandon Crawford, 49 expected slugging early going here, also from the left side. This Giants team against righties is going to be a problem still. I do believe that just the addition of Jock Peterson adds another bat. Even Steven Duggar down there at the bottom half of the order, 57.1% hard hit percentage from the left side. This is just a team going up against Carlos Carrasco that I'm going to get to well, and I do mean well above the field on.
Yeah, so I'm just looking through the exposures of the individual hitters now that I've run my my crunch here, and once there's no one hitter where it's like, oh look, I'm getting to this guy 20%, but I have like 5 to 8% exposure to all these hitters. And all of them are projected for 1 or 2% ownership. The most popular projected hitter in the entire lineup is Brandon Belt at 2.3%. And he's in 6% of my lineup. So
Jock Peterson 3,100 is just going to be in a ton of my lineups. It's going to be silly.
It's not a hard team to get overweight to. And I think that's not a bad approach to a smaller slate. It's a good offense. There's some upside there. So
have you seen the wind in the ballpark today too? The wind's blowing out 15 to 20.
Yep, that could help the offense. And then, it's not like the run total is that low in this game. It's 8. Let me see what it was when I wrote down earlier. It was 7.5. It's been bet up to 8 since then. And you compare that to the other games on the slate: Yankees, Detroit, 8.5, Chicago, Cleveland, 8, Toronto, Boston, 8.5, 8, 7 in that terrible Oakland, Baltimore game, 9 in the Washington, Arizona game. The point being is, there's expected to be just as many runs scored in this game as every other game on the slate. So I think it is one we want to get to a little bit. And the Giants are a team I'm going to be overweight to. And on the other side, Anthony DeSclafani is going to be pitching for the San Francisco Giants. He had a really solid year last year, 22.5% K rate. He had a 3.92 expected ERA, low walk rate, so we limited the amount of runners that got on base. We haven't seen him work all that deep into games yet this year. He's also going to be really low owned for today. Is he somebody that appeals to you at all as a tournament option?
Yeah, the nice thing about last year, we're seeing the walk rate come down in 2020, 10% walk rate, 6.2% last season, 2.6, not walking anybody here in the early going of this season. I think he pitched a little bit above his head. We can probably say that about just about everybody in this Giants lineup. A 3.92 expected ERA in 2021, but just a 3.17 for the season in terms of actuals. So some negative regression possibly in store, but I think he's got good enough, average enough K stuff, 23.1% now in the early going. He's around 21.5% for the career. So he doesn't intrigue me that much. The Mets are another positively leveraged team. I do not like them the same way that I like San Francisco, but the Mets still have some ridiculous bats at the top end of this order. I'm all right stacking them up in a couple lineups out of 150, but not a team I'm going to be getting carried away with because I think DeSclafani, a good actual real life pitcher.
We have a super chat here from Nathan H. And we'll talk about the Mets offense in a second because I view them kind of similarly to the Giants offense as a team that I'm not crazy interested in, but I think they warrant some exposure and just the low ownership to be a little bit overweight to the field on. But first, super chat from Nathan H. He got a $10 free bet. He wants a nice win so that he could
pet.
Tip.
Is that like Duke? You come over to my place and you just pet Duke?
It's something like that. It's
the other one was better. Handing holds. I liked the handing holds that you had.
Yeah, I found that sometimes it's difficult to talk when I'm not paying attention to what I'm saying and I'm just building baseball lineups because I wasn't able to do that earlier. So I'm not listening to what I'm saying. I'm barely paying attention, but I'm recognizing some of these words are not coming out properly. But anyway, Nathan H, $10 free bet. So one thing that would help us. What site do you have the $10 bet on? Because then I could go over to OddsShopper and find what some of the best odds are. But it's going to be certain bets are going to look totally different depending what site you're looking on. So you don't have to leave us another super chat, Nathan. Just throw in the chat what book it is on, and then I'll look at OddsShopper and we'll find some NBA props that look good for it. Oh, there we go. Caesars. That was quick.
That was
all right. Quick. So over at Caesars, let's see. What is our top NBA bet over at Caesars for today? It is Ja Morant. By the way, you guys could go check out OddsShopper, totally free tool to use and find some things to place bets on. But I also think this makes sense anyway. Ja Morant under 1.5 threes. We have projected for 1.1, and over at Caesars, that is a plus 110 bet. There's also other books where it's plus 110, but also over on Caesars. And if we look at Ja Morant's numbers this year, he's averaging off the top of my head right around 1.3 per game, pulling that up at the moment. I know he hit a couple last game, but yeah, for the season, Morant averaged 1.5 threes per game. And then if you look at some of his recent games, had 2 in the first game of the series, 0 in or 2 in the second game of the series, 0 in the first game. In general, Ja Morant is not really a high volume 3-point shooter, nor is he an accurate 3-point shooter. I think what really stands out about this line is you're getting plus money on the under. So if there's any one prop bet that makes sense, I would say Ja Morant plus money under 1.5 threes. Eric, do you have any baseball bets or a different basketball bet that you'd like to point out as well?
Yeah, I mean, for basketball purposes, Andrew Wiggins is a guy that it seems like there's a number of props that are too low. I like the over on 1.5 threes for him. Not anything to go crazy enthusiastic about, but you've got a free bet. I mean, it just depends on what your goal is. I mean, are you trying to cash it in order to have money in your account, or are you just saying like, because again, the under on 1.5 threes for John Morant plus 110, that is a 69% expected win percentage, as well as having a 44% expected ROI. So it's a pretty high probability thing to hit, in inclusion to the fact that you're getting paid out nicely when it does hit. So John Morant on the road, I think that this stands out as a pretty good one that you already identified. From a baseball perspective, I'm going to keep riding this Oakland money line up against Baltimore. These are two of the worst teams in baseball, but Paul Blackburn is so much better than what he's facing on the other side of this game that it's hard for me. And that's just ridiculous to say out loud, but minus 125 looks to be the prevailing number for it. I'm not sure what it is over there at Caesars, but if it's something in that ballpark, I feel pretty confident about it.
Well, Nathan's follow-up is he wants his $10 to become $800. That might be an unrealistic expectation. I'd start smaller and work your way up. I think that's a safer bet than being like, you know what I'm going to do with this $10 bet? I'm going to make it $1 million. Like the guy who turned the paperclip into the house. Mm-hmm. It's a little
it's like an 8-on 3-point bet. It's just
those are locks. Together. You just take every voluminous 3-point shooter, you put them together, and then cash the profits.
Too bad Twitter's suppressing him. It's too bad.
Yeah, it's really a shame. So in terms of Nathan right there, I mean, if you the best way, if you wanted to actually make the $10 into something bigger, it would have to be a futures bet. There's not going to be like one individual, unless you're just parlaying like 30 things, not 30, but a bunch of things together. It's hard to find an 80-1 prop. Do it the safe way. Go take the John Morant under 1.5 threes, and then you do tomorrow. Hopefully that wins. You get $20. Then you find like two things you like. You put $10 on each of them or something like that. Maybe find 40, put $5, and you expand and grow from there. Probably a better way to do it than just trying to turn your $10 into $1 billion. Also, if you guys ever want to take advantage of any of the free offers we have on the site, we do have a bonus page where you could use that and just find different sign-up offers from different sites, because that'll get you all different kind of sign-up bonuses and free bets, which is a good way to maximize your money and your deposits. But let's get back to talking about the Giants and the Mets. Mm-hmm. And the Mets offense going up against Anthony DeSclafani. Is it one that you have any interest in for tournaments?
I mean, yeah, it's kind of hard because Starling Marte isn't in the lineup, and that really sucks. I mean, he's been for the last couple of years one of my favorite batters back to when he was in Miami, and then he was the one-off du jour in my life his entire tenure in Oakland, and now he's out of the lineup today. Sure, they get another lefty in there, Jeff McNeil. Welcome to the party. I mean, he's going to be there. Mark Canha, I guess, is playing in the outfield alongside Jankowski. These are just not great guys to be getting to. They're cheap. They're a lot cheaper than you're getting on the Giants side of things, but I think DeSclafani is a decent enough real life pitcher. I don't want to go out of my way to go crazy picking on him here. Would have felt better having a guy like Marte up there. Power, stolen base upside adds a lot to the stack. Yeah, you get Nimmo up there leading off. I'm okay with it. He's garnering the most attention at 5.6%. But it's not a team that I'm getting carried away with the same way that I'm getting carried away with San Francisco.
When you say carried away, what does carried away entail?
I'm getting carried away with San Francisco today. I just don't believe in, like, think about it this way. Let's put the blinders on to the first two starts for Carlos Carrasco. He played Washington, he played Arizona. What do you think Carlos Carrasco's ownership would be his first start of the season, assuming 80 pitches? Coming off of last year.
Yeah, probably fairly low.
Be like 4 or 5%.
Maybe not for this slate, but yeah, it would be lower than what it is. I think that's fair to say.
And knowing everything we know about San Francisco from last year and seeing that the hard hit data is still there for guys from the left side, that the left side is just outrageous for the San Francisco team, regardless of anything else coming off of last year. What would you expect San Francisco's ownership to be coming into a spot against Carrasco?
On this slate, I don't know, 7-8%.
All right. So the way that I look at it is that if we see anything close to what we saw last year for both of these teams in a vacuum, there's no way that I would be seeing a 1.7% ownership share on San Francisco. So this is, for me, one of those spots where everything matches up to just play 20% of an offense. Like, for me, I take aggressive stands when it's basically such a small data size that we have. We have basically 3 weeks Okay. 3 weeks, less than that. We have like 3 starts for most pitchers at most, or 2 for most of them at this point in time. I just have to play a lot of the offense that is, 1, the most positively leveraged in the boom bust tool, 2, has tons of power going up against the side that I want them to, and 3, is a team that I just think has great favorable hitting conditions, wind blowing out. So everything matches up for San Francisco to be way, way, way drastically underowned if this were 2021.
Got some people agreeing with you in the chat right now. We've got Sean V agree with Lindquist.
Oh, great. Awesome. Great.
That's what dongs. I agree with that, Eric Lindquist.
Scratch everything I said. Don't play a single bat from San Francisco.
Yeah,
so I mean, good to see you.
I'm somewhat on the same page as you. I'm not going 20% of San Francisco or anything, but I certainly don't think the start for Carlos Carrasco is what we're going to see the rest of the season. But at the same time, too, he has pretty favorable projections this year. Zips is projecting him for a 3.97 ERA, Steamer 3.91, and both of them with high strikeout rate. So I'm overweight to the Giants. This is one of the team I'm more leveraged to relative to the ownership of the field, because like we said, the field is getting to them less than 2% of the time. So with me, I'm overweight to them, but not like, I'm not going crazy like you are with 20%. Let's move on to the next one. We have the Chicago White Sox against the Cleveland Guardians. This is going to be simple. Dylan Cease, I'm rostering him a lot. Eric's rostering him a lot. He hasn't even told me yet, but I know he's rostering him a lot. Tell me, why are you rostering Dylan Cease a lot?
I have a crazy amount of Dylan Cease. I love this man. You know that I love this man. I think he's going to win the AL Cy Young. So take that for what you will, which isn't saying a lot when it's like being the best amongst a bunch of fish. If he were in the NL, he'd be like the 8th best pitcher, but Dylan Cease, 39% K percentage in the early going of this season. He's my most invested year-long player coming off of last year, 31.9% K percentage, pitches a ton, almost 3,000 pitches last year. Feel really good about the fact that he only gave up 40 barrels out of nearly 3,000 pitches. That is beautiful stuff. 5.6 barrels per plate attempt. I'm feeling pretty confident about him. 405 batted balls, actually 9.9 barrel percentage. Not as elite as what I was kind of looking at there, but 235 expected slugging in the early going, limiting some hard contact here. He just looks as good as what he looked last year. 3.65 expected ERA. Yeah, he's around 2 right now. That's going to regress, but my God, this guy is an absolute beast.
And then on the other side, I have no real interest in the Cleveland Guardians as an offense. It's a team that whatever you're playing 150 lineups, you have a stack here there. It's not the end of the world, but we have them with a 3.4% chance of being the top stack on the slate. For a smaller slate here, this is the lowest odds of any team of the day. So no real significant interest in me for Cleveland, and I really do like getting to Dylan Cease. It seems like that is something that we are certainly aligned on. And then on the other side of this game, we have starting for Cleveland, Zach Plesac. Plesac wasn't terrible last year, but he was not a good fantasy pitcher just because the strikeouts weren't there. He limited some of the damage with a 4.51 expected ERA, but a 16.7% K rate. Unless we're looking like a 2 or 3 game slate, there's really going to be times I want to get to Zach Plesac. It's no different here. And then against an offense in the Chicago White Sox that has a lot of power and against a pitcher that just doesn't miss very many bats, I think it's reasonable to think that we could see Cleveland put up a pretty big number on the board. So Chicago, one of the offense I'm getting to against Plesac. No interest in Plesac. What are you doing here?
No interest in Plesac. I mean, on the other side of it, we have a very explosive offense, but you're paying full freight for them with Tim Anderson up at 5,900, Luis Robert 6K. You do get the salary saving in Lurie Garcia, but he's not a great hitter. Yasmani Grandal, 4,100. That's a better tag to be getting for him, better from the left side in terms of power numbers. So Yasmani Grandal, I'm all right going to him there. Eloy Jimenez, we're going to see him start to have some power as well. So I don't read much into his start to the season, where I believe he only has 1 homer on the year, not really hitting the ball as hard as you would hope, but it's going to happen for Eloy. I don't really have a whole lot of issue going to him. And you get some salary savers at the back end like you normally do here. Gavin Sheets isn't cheap anymore at 4K, but you get like a Hasley batting 9th, 2K. You get Lurie Garcia up in that order. I think he'll end up being more popular than 8.4% going up against Plesac if you're going to be seeing like around 10% ownership share for this team. I'm okay getting to them, but it's not my most enthusiastic. Again, it's weird to say that I like San Francisco more, but I just still do. At 9.2% top stack potential, a little bit of positive leverage. But the problem is the guys I want to get to are just so expensive. And I'm going to be prioritizing from that same team, the pitcher.
All right, let's move on to the next game. Another one with some pretty good looking pitchers, Tanner Houck and Kevin Gausman, two guys last year that both had a lot of success and generated a whole bunch of strikeouts. So first for Tanner Houck, 30% K rate, Kevin Gausman, 29.3%. I understand that he's going from pitching in a pretty pitcher-friendly environment in San Francisco now to pitching in Toronto. But I find it hard to not have interest in both of the pitchers here, even though the offenses are really good. I can't feel great about it, but the strikeout rate is there that even if these pitchers give up some runs, I think the strikeout should be able to offset that to some extent. Also, Houck is not all that expensive on DK today. Are you getting to these pitchers like I am, or are the offenses scaring you off?
No, this is a play everybody game. We've had this, I think, 3 or 4 times now already this season in Toronto games where because people are facing Toronto, you see really low ownership on the pitcher, but then you also see low ownership on the offense. And we have both stacks that are positively leveraged. We have both pitchers that going off their 2021 sample size, like, do I expect Kevin Gausman pitching in Boston or, in long-term in Toronto to have the same stuff he had in San Francisco, the best pitching ballpark in all of baseball? No, I don't expect him to be as successful, but the K percentage is still there in the early going of this year, 31.1%. Last year, 29.3%. So we're paying for his upside. Like you're rostering him for his upside. You can't just, roster him and think, oh, well, if he gets blown up, I'm going to lose money. No, you're probably going to lose money even if he has a middling performance. So I feel pretty confident that both pitchers I'm going to be above the field on, especially Tanner Houck on the Boston side of this going up against Toronto. Toronto is an imposing offense. There's no question about it, but he is really cheap. He's by far the guy that I want to get to the most on the cheap end underneath 8K. There's really not a lot of people even in that mid 8K range that I would prioritize over Houck. The only reason you're seeing him come in lower owned is that just the ability for him to get blown up against Toronto. But Raimel Tapia leading off 28.1% K percentage, Bo Bichette around 24%, Vlad as good as he is around 29%. You get Zach Collins as the catcher, 33.3%, Matt Chapman 29%. There are a ton of strikeouts that exist in this lineup if he's got good stuff. So yes, an offense that's dangerous, but also one that strikes out a lot.
And which of the pitchers are you getting to more of? And let's see where I am right now in the run that I've got going.
Getting to more Houck.
I have a little bit more Gausman right now, but I want to rearrange just because of the price difference. I think I'd rather be getting to Tanner Houck over Kevin Gausman, because Gausman over on DK 8,900 compared to the 7,800 price tag. That's something to me where I think I'd rather be getting to Houck. Also, I need up my exposure to Dylan Cease, which is going to change all this a little bit as well, because I want Dylan Cease to be my most rostered pitcher by far, and he's only marginally my most rostered pitcher right now. That's a problem. I want him to be just far and away the guy I'm getting the most to. So let me rerun this and then see where I end up on them. But my intention here is to get to more of Tanner Houck, even if I don't feel great about rostering pitchers against the Red Sox offense or the Blue Jays offense for that matter, because just so much firepower in both of them. Like you said before, I think that this is a play both sides thing. I know we said that about a bunch of teams so far, but I think it's justified for this spot as well, because the pitchers are low owned, the offense are low owned. We have two really high strikeout upside pitchers. We have two offenses with a ton of power potential. But which offense are you getting to more, Boston or Toronto?
I'm getting to a little bit more Boston, and it has more to do with the fact that I am playing a little bit more Houck. And so naturally that's going to happen when you're playing 40, 150 lineups, depending on what your allocation is for today. But I kind of see guys like Story. I'm worried about him at 21.1% hard hit percentage. It's been such a small sample size here, but everybody else in this lineup, aside from Story, has just been murdering the baseball. Everybody with north of 40% hard hit percentages, including a guy like Jackie Bradley Jr., Bobby Dahlbeck. I think all of these guys go a little bit under-owned on every slate. It's a gigantic offense. And looking at the top stacks, well, both of them have positive leverage going towards them. But I think people are going to be more inclined to stack up against Houck as opposed to Gausman, more of the brand name. He's going to be a little bit more popular. So just because of that, I think Boston's just a team that I'm going to land on a little bit more.
Yeah, and somebody in chat asked if these are pitchers that would be looking to play in a cash game, or both of them in a cash game together. If you're playing on FanDuel, you're playing Cease in cash. If you're playing on DraftKings, you're also playing Cease in cash. So I think who the SP2 is, I think I'd feel most comfortable with Montgomery as an SP2 for cash purposes on DraftKings just because he's so cheap. These offenses have so much firepower that I would not feel comfortable playing either of them in a cash game. As much as Eric and I might be liking them as tournament pitchers because of their upside, I wouldn't feel great about them in cash. Would you also agree with that?
I'm right there with you. Again, I can tell you right now, Jordan Montgomery is going to be more popular than 30%. His ownership's gone up a little bit since we started the show. He's at 27. Now he's up to 30. He's going to be the most popular SP2. I think I would just play him in cash, even though I'm not playing him in tournaments.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing also something else to think about as the ownership has changed is don't forget also is that we now have Fantasy Cruncher up and running, and it wasn't at the start of the show. Mm-hmm. So now that that's running, that's also something that's going to impact ownership as we run some of the numbers and try to figure that out. But that aside, let's move on to the Minnesota Twins at the Kansas City Royals. Joe Ryan has sneakily been really good over the last year and a half. Last season, Joe Ryan posted a 30% K rate with a 2.97 expected ERA. He is not a pitcher that's picking up all that much ownership today. 18% over on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he's picking up 13% ownership. Do you like him as a pivot play off of some of the other high-end pitchers that are more popular?
I love him as a pivot play. I think he's going to go in way under-owned in this spot. And Joe Ryan, I don't even believe it. It's hard for me to really comprehend how Joe Ryan fell through the cracks because he's a mid-90s. He's not a fastball. He's not a flamethrower by any means, but this guy has just been good. He's 25. He was a late-round pick here for our Twins, or for my Twins. I apologize. Not to put all of you as Twins fans all the time, but out of the middle of nowhere last year, 30% K percentage with just a 5% walk rate. A very, very limited sample size, only 412 pitches, but I didn't know what to expect out of him starting. I think I kind of pumped the brakes, but he's expensive. And I think that people are going to rely a little bit more on Gausman. I talked about liking the Boston side, and I still like Gausman, no doubt about it, but you're paying up to Joe Ryan to be a little bit contrarian, and $400 isn't that hard for me to find on this slate. I've talked about liking San Francisco. The Minnesota offense isn't negatively leveraged it is now negative 3%. But there's some cheapies that exist, some value stacks on this slate that just make it a little bit more palatable to land on a guy like Joe Ryan alongside Cease. So I don't find it that difficult to land on both of them together. In my 3 big lineups I'm putting together on DK, I'm literally playing Cease and Ryan in all 3.
Well, that's pretty aggressive to me it's only 3 lineups. So right. It's not like a lock and load Joe Ryan. It's just 3 out of 3 lineups. Mm-hmm. I like him as a contrarian option though. I think that he's a good pivot off of the likes of Gausman or off of Carlos Carrasco. So I have no issue there. I also tend to think his ownership could end up coming in lower than what it's projected at. As for the Twins offense, I do think it's a really good spot for them. They are way underpriced, but they're also negatively leveraged. So this is not a stack that I'm really looking to get to all that much. We've already mentioned that there's a ton of stacks we do like. I'm going to be rostering some Twins hitters as one-offs today, but as an actual stack, it's probably one I'm more apt to stay away from because of the popularity. What are you going to do with the team that is one of the more negatively leveraged offenses this afternoon?
Yeah, Joe Ryan was in the Cruz trade, by the way. He was drafted by Tampa Bay, but I'm just saying I have no idea how we found him in terms of I don't think anybody in Tampa Bay, is a very analytic forward team, and they've been very, very sharp as far as what they put together here. But on the other side of it, we were just talking about Greinke, right?
No. We're talking about the Twins offense. So Greinke's
Twins offense. Yeah. Twins offense. Byron Buxton back. Hello. 688 expected slugging. Stay healthy, young man, because he's just the most fun player to watch in baseball. I love this man so much. I can't say enough good things. Offensively, defensively, wins above replacement. He checks every box as long as he's healthy here. And seeing him leading off again is a little bit of a sigh of relief. This guy, contrarian to Joe Ryan and his prospects, the number 2 pick in the draft, absolutely was expected to be it for these Minnesota Twins. He is going to be it for these Minnesota Twins when he's healthy. So Byron Buxton leading off just adds a whole nother element to it. Pretty easy to stack him up with the rest of this team because everybody else is basically a salary saver. Correa, his price on FanDuel has been laughable the last few days. You're going to continue to play lots of him or have to fade other people playing lots of him. Just a team that makes it pretty easy to stack up. I'm not overly enthusiastic to get to some of the guys at the bottom end of the lineup. Garlick, 662 expected slugging, very limited sample so far this year. Jeffers is not a good hitting catcher. I'm probably not going to include him in some of the stacks. I think it'd be more inclined to include Nick Gordon in the 9 hole than Ryan Jeffers at the 8.
You've got Nathan H is asking because he's got his props and it looks like he's trying to parlay every single prop together because he wants to be a millionaire off his free $10 bet. But he's asking us about Zach Greinke over 4 strikeouts. No, Zach Greinke does not generate strikeouts at this point in his career. If I'm taking either side of that, I'm more inclined to take under 4 strikeouts than over. What do you make of that number? Our guy Zach H left us a super chat before. He's trying to get rich off the $10 free bet, Eric. Zach Greinke over under 4 strikeouts.
Oh, man. I will say I'd be inclined to take the under. I bet an under on a 2.5 strikeout prop that's coming up a little bit later. So, well, actually, Ooh. Are we going to be talking about Pittsburgh at all tonight? Are we talking about the 3-gamer tonight? No.
Yeah, at the end we'll talk about the 3-gamer.
Okay. Because I took an under on 2.5 strikeouts for Bryce Wilson. That's a real thing that happened in my life this morning. So questioning choices and decisions that I've made along the way. But I will say I'm inclined to be taking some of these unders. I think that's the right side of it is taking the under, but I feel like it's a pretty efficient line.
Yeah, it's not one that I have any bet on. But once again, I think if you're trying to expect 5+ strikeouts in any one individual start from Zach Greinke at this point in the year, that's a tall task. He's not throwing very hard. He's not generating very many swing and misses. What is his K rate so far this year? Because I know the numbers I have on the screen right now are the K rate from last year. Oh, it is bad. How many strikeouts? Or are you just saying his? Do you know how many strikeouts he has total this year?
Does he have 1?
He has 1.
He has a 2.3% K percentage.
Yes. This year, Zach Greinke has made 2 starts. He's pitched 11 innings. He's 1 strikeout. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna retract. I do like the under. I do like the under 4 strikeouts for Zach Greinke. I do like the under.
Okay. Yeah. It's fine. I mean, I really have no strong stand on it because I expect for him to be closer to around 15% going forward. But even that, I guess, would make the under look all right. You add Byron Buxton back into the lineup. As much as I love the man, he does strike out a lot. 38.5% here on the season. Carlos Correa, he was the guy who struck out the most on that Houston lineup. He's around 31.5% here on the season. But yeah, Buxton around a 29% strikeout guy for his career. So as much as I love having him back in the lineup, that might be 1K coming around in succession. Same thing with Correa. You get that middle of the lineup that's harder to strike out, Araz, Urshela, Kepler, but then Sano, never been a guy who the whole back end, you basically are fitting the Araz, Urshela, Kepler side because, they're just not going to strike out. But the other guys, I think 4 is in the realm, but I mean, is it plus money or is it, what was the line on it?
He just said over under 4.
Okay. Well, let's hit the under on it here. And then I feel all right if it's under, if it's like minus 110, I'm okay with it.
I'll also, one more thing before we move on from Zach Greinke. Post All-Star break last year, how many outings do you think he had with 5 or more strikeouts? Post All-Star break, entire second half of the season.
0.
1.
Okay.
Does not generate very many strikeouts at this point in the season. Jeff Williams, super chat, Buxton or Soto, high dollar single entry GPP on DK. I'm pretty sure I have more exposure to Soto. I just uploaded my lineups and yes, I do have more exposure to Soto. We still have Buxton coming off an injury. And as much as I love Buxton, I bet him to win MVP before the season started. I fully expect him to be in the running until he gets hurt. Soto's probably the best overall hitter we have in baseball right now. So the answer is Soto for me. Eric, I know you have your biases towards your man, Byron Buxton, but who are you getting more exposure to today? Soto or Buxton?
You're asking the wrong guy. I mean, Byron Buxton is my absolute pride and joy, but I will say Soto and him, I've got both around 29%. So take that for what you will. I mean, I view them almost identically. I think Soto comes in a little bit higher owned. I mean, we've got him a little bit higher owned in our projections. So I'm going to say Buxton for ownership purposes if you're chalky elsewhere, but they're both just phenomenal hitters. It's apples and oranges, or it's not apples and oranges. It's apples and apples.
Oh, by the way, Nathan said the under is minus 140. Yeah, stay away from that. Minus 140 is a pretty hefty number for under 4. I thought we were looking at, like even money or something. That's
I knew there was something attached. I knew there was something attached to it.
All right.
Watch him at 0 today. We're going to feel like donkeys.
No, I'd feel good because I said if I had to take a side, to be the under. And I'm playing 0 of him. I'm playing 0 of him in DFS. I'd be very happy with it.
What is it? If you're going to bet the under of 4, what's the likelihood he gets to 5 and burns you?
Low.
So I'm going to now decide, just as I'm talking myself through it, I'm going to say bet the under. Bet the under. Yeah. I'll live with the
I would have. So it's funny because we kind of reversed. Until I found out it was minus 140, I was all on the under train. But whatever. If I have to take a side, it's the under. Zach Greinke doesn't generate swing misses at this point in his career. We have next my least favorite game to talk about on this entire slate. I want nothing to do with it. Baltimore Orioles, Oakland A's. The pitchers suck. The offenses suck. The total in this game is 7 runs. I'm not really getting exposure to the pitchers. I'm not really getting exposure to the offenses. Are you doing anything different with this game? I just don't really have interest.
Did you refresh Tyler Wells' ownership?
Let me check. I mean, I have him. Let me see if I have him in even any lineups. I have him in 2% of lineups. What is his ownership?
Something just changed drastically in our projections because he was not this earlier in the day. I can tell you that much.
All right, let's get. Yeah, there's no way this is correct.
There's no way, right?
There's no way that a third of the field is playing Tyler Wells.
I have 0%. So I would hope.
Oh, it's actually changed again. He's at 25% now.
Okay. 25.
Either way, that's still very high.
That's pretty high. He was not that earlier when when I was starting the show, when I was researching this morning. He wasn't even like on the board, and now he's at 25%. That is hefty. If you had to make me play a pitcher for this game, I would actually go more towards the Blackburn side, which is kind of surprising to say, but that's just how I view Baltimore's offense. It's horrendous. Aside from Cedric Mullins, there isn't a single guy that I'm that scared of in this ballpark against a righty. It's brutal. It's a brutal offense. And you can say the same thing about Oakland on the other side, which is why, Wells is a popular punt, but you also have to look at like what offenses are you really trying to pay up for today? I mean, the White Sox are facing Plesac, not the easiest spot, and they're really expensive. Boston is facing Gaussman. That is just a contrarian spot. I don't find it that hard to land on them, even alongside some Cease and Carrasco, or not Carrasco, Cease and Ryan for me. But there's not that many. There's no Coors Field. There's no insane offense that I feel like I need to be playing here in this spot. So I find 5,400 or 5,200 for Tyler Wells just a little unnecessary.
2 starts this year, he's thrown 54 and 64 pitches.
Yeah, what are we doing here?
There's no, I don't buy. If he's actually going to be 25 or 30% owned, then I would be more motivated to go stack the A's for leverage. I just don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah, Anthony Childs. Yeah, Wells is inexpensive. Peeps are pairing him with expensive stacks, but they're the same expensive stacks. Like there's only so many expensive stacks you can get to, and they're all in tough spots or have run projections under 4.5 or just aren't that feasible to get to. Give me every other pitcher on the board. Like it doesn't make sense at that ownership to play him.
And by the way, Tyler Wells' numbers look good last year, but he was a relief pitcher. It's way easier to find success as a reliever than a starter. And then he's also had decent minor league numbers, but he didn't called up to the big leagues until he was 26 years old. He's pitched 5 innings this year. He has a 6.35 ERA, a 7.02 expected ERA. He's throwing 60 pitches. Yeah, no thanks. If I lose on a slate because I get burned by Tyler Wells, whatever, cool. I just it doesn't do anything for me. And then same with Paul Blackburn on the other side. I know that he's had better numbers to start the year, but you look at him last year and over the course of his career, this is not a guy that generates strikeouts at all. Last season, he had a 5.87 ERA, a 5.47 expected ERA with a 14.9% K rate, which, by the way, was up from his career average. For his career, he's a 13.6% K rate. Another guy that just does not generate swing and misses. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think Paul Blackburn's going to throw a lot of pitches over the middle of the plate, and the Orioles are going to hit a lot of weak ground ball outs. I think this is going to be a pretty unappealing game from fantasy purposes on both sides. Eventually, one of these Orioles games is going to hit an over. I hope it's not this one.
I'm with you. It's an unappealing spot all the way around. That's what I was kind of saying. I was like, it's just such a weird place because I don't really have that much interest. I have like 8% Paul Blackburn, whatever. But I'm just not playing this Wells character. It's just not going to happen for me.
And then are you doing anything with the offenses in this spot? Because once again, this is the lowest total on the slate. The pitchers suck. The offenses suck. This is a game that's like everything is like a 1%er for me, if at all.
Nope. Just we can move along. This is the most unappealing spot for me on the slate.
All right. So final game to talk about, and this is only on DraftKings. This game is not on FanDuel. The Arizona Diamondbacks against the Washington Nationals, the game that has the highest total on the slate as well. I know these offenses don't look great on paper, but neither do the pitchers. Zach Davies against Josh Rogers. So as a result, we have a game which is a little bit later. The temperature is going to be a little bit warmer. We're expecting some runs to be scored against pitchers that also do not generate swing and misses. Josh Rogers last year, 14.6% K rate. Zach Davies last year, 17.1% K rate. Here's the one holdup with me for this game. Good spot for the offenses, but the field recognizes it as such. So we have the Arizona Diamondbacks projected for negative 3.8% leverage. The Washington Nationals, the most negatively leveraged team on the entire slate with a negative 5% leverage score. This is clearly a good spot on paper for both of these offenses, but the field is getting there in too big of a way. Therefore, I'm going pretty well underweight to the field. We talked about a bunch of other stacks that are going to be really low on that we like being overweight to, just by the process of mathematics and statistics, Eric. We can't be overweight to every offense on the slate, and this is another one that I'm looking to short the field on. Are you doing anything different?
But if I recommend every offense, I'm never wrong, Greg.
This is true.
Chestnut checkers, young man. Chestnut checkers. Juan Soto is going to be crazy popular. Ketel Marte is going to be crazy popular. Carson Kelly, Cooper Hummel, Cesar Hernandez is going to be popular. I mean, this is kind of a crazy spot. I think I'm going to have shares of these offenses. I think that's going to kind of be what I do. It's going to be easy because of how much I like San Francisco, how much I like getting to Boston, how much I like getting to these completely unowned offenses. I think I'm going to be able to mix and match some of these guys as 1 and 2 mans. Soto sticks out for me. Nelson Cruz always. I'm pretty sure that I'm still going to have quite a few one-offs and 2 mans from this game. But as you said, very unappealing to just go out and stack up and try to do it this way because they are just so negatively leveraged. Negative 5%. Most negatively leveraged teams both come from this game. So hard for me to land there too in full 5 mans.
Yeah. Once again, if we are going to be overweight to a bunch of these lower owned offenses in the early games, it stands to reason that we're going to be underweight to the really highly owned offenses in the later games. So playing the earlier offenses heavily, I'm not 0% of Arizona or Washington, but I'm well underweight to the field just for reference in our top stacks tool. And also DraftKings only because the game is not on the FanDuel slate. Washington is projected for 15% ownership with a 10% chance to be the top stack. Arizona, 9.6% chance to be a top stack with 13.4% ownership. For my money, the 2 worst offenses to stack on the slate relative to leverage score. Teams to be underweight to the field on. Doesn't mean you can't get to them. Doesn't mean you can't play them as one-offs. I'm just not getting as much of those stacks of them as the field is. Do you have any other takes on this slate? If not, we could do a quick summation of the late slate and answer any questions anybody has.
No, I mean, we've got 11 minutes to lock of that early slate. Get your lineups in. Just always have a set of lineups uploaded. This is a little different than NBA. Eric Lindquist is not very usually rushing to finish up his lineups here in this sport, which is a nice feeling, but it's always good to have your dummies up here. I'm kind of tweaking some things on the back end here. I'm getting to a little bit of Carson Kelly. I find Carson Kelly at 3,500. He's going to be crazy popular. I think he probably should be in this spot. He's had a terrible, and I mean horrible beginning of the season. But this is just a get right spot for both offenses here. I'm okay getting to some shares of like one-offs, but Zach Collins is batting 4th going up against Taylor Houck. That's a guy that I'm just playing the most of at the catcher position. I think you and I have both been playing him an absolute ton. It's nice to see him up to 4th. Maybe that bolsters up his up a little bit of his ownership here, but I feel like against Houck, he's still not going to get appreciated the way that he's going to be long-term. He's just a really, really good hitting catcher.
Yep. He is also a catcher I have a whole lot of exposure to, only 2,700 on DK. It's different FanDuel versus DraftKings because FanDuel, we don't have to roster a catcher, but we do on DK. And Zach Collins is a cheap one who hits in the middle of a good order. So we've talked about Zach Collins a few times over the last week, and the point still stands. He should be more expensive. And not that we like to look just at recent performances from catchers, but this is just a good indication of why his price tag doesn't make any sense. The last 4 games for Zach Collins, 10 DK fantasy points, 22, 9, and then 17. He has homered twice in those 4 games, and he has 8 hits in those 4 games, so 2 hits per game. He just should be much more expensive than 2,700. So I'm on the same page as you. I like getting to him as a cheap catching option. Let me just scroll through the YouTube.
I was going to ask also, who are your most popular one-offs? I always think that that's always a fun conversation, just in terms of like your roster construction, how you're going about building your 150, how to get a little bit different. Like for me, I'm getting to tons of Gallo and Jock. and at the outfield position where Soto's going to be so popular. It's two gigantic bats. They can have power up against any right. It doesn't matter how difficult the opposing pitcher is. When they hit it, it's gone in those kind of regards. So like for me, I like getting to one-offs. Soto should be as popular as he is, but considering that, I'm just trying to get different in the outfield. Plus, there's a lot of cheapies that allow me to play more Cease, allow me to play more Joe Ryan, allow me to play more Gausman, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm really high on the Yankees. They're my most stacked offense. I talked about how much I'm expecting a pretty precipitous decline of Michael Pineda this year. So as a result, kind of across the board, my most roster hitters are New York Yankees. In the outfields, Aaron Judge, shortstop, not as much because I don't have a whole lot of interest in Ian Kiner Falefa, but third base, and second base, DJ LeMahieu is eligibility at both positions. First base, Rizzo is my most rostered first baseman. So just a lot of Yankees guys that I'm picking and choose. Well, not me hand building these, but just when I ran through Fantasy Cruncher, I'm getting to a lot of the Yankees in general.
Okay, cool. Just kind of wanted to get your opinion on it.
And then let's see if we have any questions from chat. We will answer some of those. If not, let's do a quick summary of the late slate. Once again, it's only 3 games. It has also kind of a weird lock time, so the contests aren't all that big. But we could go through this and just look at some of the tools and try to figure out if the slate was starting now, who would be some of our most rostered hitters and offenses on the slate. So let's start with the pitchers, and I'll just run through the list of all these guys. We've got Pablo Lopez, Taylor Hearn, Marco Gonzalez, Mark Leiter Jr., Bryce Wilson, Jordan Hicks. They are the starting pitchers, at least listed for today. Jordan Hicks is not going to be working very deep into the game. That aside, what do you make of Pablo Lopez just at first glance, who's projected for over 70% ownership on a small slate?
Welcome to the small slate that we've been given, not the small slate that we deserve. Pablo Lopez, not the highest of K rates here either, 20% K percentage, but it's a pretty righty heavy St. Louis lineup. We know that going forward, going into this, that's where all the power exists. He can kind of neutralize that a little bit, but a 27.5% K percentage in 2021, 3.52 expected ERA. He's just a good pitcher. So he feels safe. He feels secure. On these 3 gamers, I'm going to try to find ways to get away from some of these guys because the stack on the other side, there is a lot of power, but it's such a good ballpark. It's such a good pitcher that it's hard to really find any fault in that.
Yeah. Oh, and also I think this is a good question. We have, and I'll get back to this because I have some talking points about Marco Gonzalez, but I want to make sure that we talk about the early slate.
Oh, first, of course you do.
Because that locks shortly. Dude, Marco Gonzalez sucks and he's projected for 61% ownership. But we have from, well, this is a hard name too, IROCXNO00BS. So Iroxen Noobs, I guess. He's asking, can you explain how the highest team total out of 12 teams has a 10% chance to be a top stack? If all things were equal, each team would be 8 to 9%. So why would the highest team total only be 10? So the difference between a team that's projected for 5.1 runs or 4.9 runs, it's very, very insignificant. And that's why there is so much leverage that pops up in baseball, because you'll very regularly see the team with the highest implied team total be the most roster team on the slate by a very wide margin. But the gap between them and say the second or third team is not all that significant, which for instance, here, just going through the implied team totals I have here written down, the Nationals, for instance, they have a team total implied of 5 runs. All right. So that's the highest on the slate. Yeah. But then we have the Yankees right behind them at 4.9. Like, what's the difference between a team with 4.9 and a 5 implied run total? It's very, very insignificant. That's the reason why the margins in baseball is really low. I mean, even the difference between 5 and 4 isn't crazy different from a ceiling perspective. The floor is different, and maybe the matchup doesn't look as good. The team that has 5 implied runs is more likely to have higher runs than the team that has 4 implied runs, but not by the margin that a lot of people think there is. And that's the reason also why there's a lot of leverage to be found in baseball by rostering some of these teams that are lower owned, because, you know, the difference between half a run, it's really not that significant, even if it feels like it looking at the matchups on paper.
Yep. I don't even really know what to add to that. I mean, we play the leverage game. We talk about top stacks where the leverage exists because we're talking about a difference of usually 1.5 runs max between the lowest implied team total and the highest implied team total this early in the season. Now, as weather changes, as you start seeing heat hit to the Midwest and you have humidity added, you have 95 degrees, 100-degree games in Arlington, you have Coors Field, you have all these other things. There's going to be more radical differences, and we have to get very, very specific about how we go about building our lineups. But as it stands right now, it is so tightly bunched that just give me better offenses against good pitchers, give me spots that are going under-owned, and let everybody else go to these Arizona, Washington five-mans and try to make their hay.
Yeah, and then let me look at, because Alex Kaiser's asked us about what makes the Mets look good. And once again, it's just really low ownership for the Mets that has them positively leveraged, then combined with fairly positive hitting environments. You mentioned before 15 to 20 mile per hour winds blowing out. And then also the Mets have an implied team total of 4.2 runs. Compare that to the Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks implied total is 4.7. There's a half run difference between the Diamondbacks and the Mets. Realistically, if this slate plays out 100 times, the Diamondbacks are outscoring the Mets 55 out of 100 times. The Mets outscore them 45 out of 100, probably something along those lines, just off, not anything specific, but just kind of a rough estimate. But the Mets are projected for 4% ownership as a team and Arizona 12.5% ownership. It's just not a situation where I think we could reasonably expect Arizona outscore them 3-1 in terms of odds that they're going to be a higher scoring team. It doesn't mean they're not more likely to outscore them. They are. It's just by the slightest of margins. But the ownership gap between them is so significant. So that's kind of how I look at and interpret some of the data in the top stack tools. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
No, that's, again, you're sharp. I'm going to let you do the talking with that.
And I found out, by the way, it is IROC Noobs. That's what it was. What threw me off was the X in the middle.
IROC Noobs. Yeah, you know what? Kicker of yes. There's never a time where that's not going to be funny. So congratulations.
But how would you? It has the X in the middle. Would that have not thrown you off? Also,
IROCs and Noobs is how I would have said it. Exactly like you said.
Yeah. Well, either way, we've got that. If you guys have any other questions about the tools or anything, you could certainly ask me those or DM me on Twitter. Either way, and if you want access to those tools, you could sign up for MLB packages for as low as $4.95 for a weekly pass. And, that's just a low dollar way to kind of get your foot in the door and check out some of the stuff we have, like the Top Stacks tool. And it's definitely useful to understand how some of those numbers work when you're going out and understanding why it is that some of those offenses look positively leveraged. But let's get back talking about the night slate of Marco Gonzalez. I just don't have interest in rostering a 61% on Marco Gonzalez. I know it's a small slate. I know the pitching options are thin. But Marco Gonzalez, to me, has to be the worst option when he's 61% on because he was not good at all last year. And I guess maybe he could be a little bit better this year because he can't be worse than he was last season. And his numbers to start the year, sure, he is a 3 ERA, but he's a 5.07 expected ERA. Last year, once again, he did have a 3.96 ERA, which isn't terrible, but a 5.02 expected ERA. The house of cards is coming apart soon for Marco Gonzalez. He does not strike out guys. He gives up a lot of contact, a lot of hard contact. He had a 239 BABIP last year, 259 BABIP so far this year. Not stuff that I consider to be sustainable. I don't like Marco Gonzalez. Do you like him tonight?
Yeah, my third bet. So I talked about Oakland money line. I talked about Oakland money line. I talked about the under of Bryce Wilson. We'll talk about him to kind of round out the slate. Under 2.5 strikeouts, which just seems like a low number, but I think it could be even lower. Similar to that Greinke one we talked about. I like plus 1.5 Texas Rangers so much here that I made a point of emphasis to find a way to get that money in because Taylor Hearn on one side, yeah, he's not very good, but Marco Gonzalez, there could not possibly be a pitcher that I believe in less, especially from the left side here. Especially, he gives up a lot of power to lefties, that being Seager, that being Brad Miller, going to probably be in this lineup here as well. I just see him giving up power everywhere. Limited hard hitting from the early going here this season and last season as well. But my God, expected slugging, bottom 10th percentile last season, doesn't strike out bats, gives up a ton of barrels, doesn't really have any pitch that's redeeming. I said he doesn't really even hit over 90 miles per hour on any pitch. His fastball is usually sitting high 80s. I don't see how he survives another big league season. I don't understand it. He can't keep getting away with it. Breaking Bad. I know you were watching it, so
I have been rewatching Breaking Bad. When I just sit in my room at night now and I'm sitting there, I'll watch baseball and basketball on my iPad, and then I'll just have my TV running also and just play. I've already watched it, so I don't have to pay that close of attention. I just kind of have it running while I'm sweating the basketball games and my bets and whatnot. But
this is why we're friends. Greatest show of all time. Not even, I mean, it is close. There's a lot of contenders, but I
think my favorite Sopranos, but
I get that. I didn't like Sopranos as much.
Really?
I think it's a good show. It's a really, really good show, but I prefer The Wire to it. I prefer Breaking Bad, obviously, to it. There's a lot of shows that I prefer to it.
Interesting. I didn't like the Sopranos movie that came out recently, but it doesn't really impact my view of the show. As for offenses for tonight, I know we have the Texas Rangers as negatively leveraged, but are people really going to be stacking the Texas Rangers when Marco Gonzalez is going to be in 61% of the lineups? I tend to think not. So Texas is going to be my favorite stack of the slate just because I don't think I want to play Marco Gonzalez and he's 61% owned. I kind of feel like I'm obligated to get more on the other side. So I'm going to be on Texas pretty heavily here. If you would pick one stack to roster for tonight, tell me who it is, and then we'll close this out.
One stack to roster, one stack to rule them all, one stack to find them. I'd probably go to the Marlins before I went to Texas. I think Texas really stands out. But looking at them going up, so they're facing St. Louis, Jordan Hicks. It's just not going to be a long outing here for him. It's a Miami team that I think has enough pops. They've got positive leverage. You really want to play a lot of the ownership game on some of these shorter slates. I'll probably, if I'm 5-man stacking up some spots here, for sure we'll have Texas in that allotment. Marco Gonzalez, I believe, as well as you do, the most overowned pitcher on this slate. Pablo Lopez, I understand why he's 71%. 61% Marco is just brutal. So I'm with you. Probably be shying away from that. I'll put a couple in and definitely going to have some stacks against him, but I'll take Miami just slightly.
All right, that is going to do it for us. Guys, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out all of the other content we have today. We've got the NBA Deeper Dive, NBA Live Before Lock later. Good luck with all of your DFS and sports betting action today.